Thank you. Appreciate you guys joining us today. We're here to talk about the first of its kind ordinance that San Jose is passing, requiring liability insurance and investments in violence prevention from gun owners. You'll hear from a number of really great speakers, community activists, and nonprofit CEOs. And right now I'm going to bring up the mayor of San Jose, Sam Liccardo. I ask that you please keep your questions till the end, and then we'll call on you. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you and good morning. We're gathered here this morning in front of an incredibly important nonprofit organization that serves our city and our entire valley. It's Next Door Solutions for Domestic Violence. And it's here that Esther Perales-Diekman and a team of staff and volunteers perform literally life-saving work every day in our community. They invest their energies, their time, their talent to save lives, but we're not investing nearly enough in organizations like Esther's. Their efforts to protect their clients from harm are made more perilous when those clients live in households where there is a gun. Tomorrow, the council will have an opportunity to do something about this. We'll have an opportunity to pass legislation that can ensure ongoing investment in important work here and in other evidence-established programs like Next Door Solutions that can help prevent gun violence through initiatives around mental health, around suicide prevention, addiction treatment, and even gun safety classes. I'm honored to be joined by several colleagues and community leaders here with me today, and you'll hear from each one of them. Of course, I mentioned Esther. She'll be followed by Sharon Jenkin, who is a volunteer, the state lead in the state of California for community outreach for an incredible organization, grassroots organization called Moms Demand Action, and they've been a great partner in our efforts. She'll be followed by Vice Mayor Chappie Jones and by Council Member David Cohen, who have been great partners in this work, and we're grateful. I am grateful for their leadership. As I mentioned, the council tomorrow will have an opportunity to vote on this ordinance, and it's comprised of two elements. First, that gun owners be required to have liability insurance coverage for their firearms in the same way, for example, that auto drivers are required. And secondly, that we'll be investing fees from gun owners in evidence-based initiatives to reduce gun violence and harm. If the council approves this measure, San Jose would become the first city in the nation, indeed the only jurisdiction in the nation, to be able to implement this kind of innovative gun regulation. Now, why should the city or any city get involved? And the answer is fairly straightforward for those who have been watching what has happened in Congress over the last several decades. We know too well in cities throughout the country that we cannot wait for Congress to act to protect our residents. More than 200 San Joseans every single year suffer death or serious injury as a result of firearms. And we must do whatever we can within our power to prevent another family from experiencing yet another devastating loss of the kind that Sharon will describe in her own life. The two components of this initiative, requiring liability insurance and investment into violence reduction programs, utilize long-established public health approaches to reducing harm in many other contexts. So first, the insurance. We have seen how insurance has reduced auto fatalities over several decades, for example, by incentivizing safer driving and the purchase of cars equipped with devices like airbags and anti-lock brakes. As a result, we have collectively reduced per mile fatalities in this country through auto collisions by more than 80% over 5 decades. Similarly, gun liability insurance available today on the market can adjust premiums to encourage gun owners to purchase and use gun safes, install trigger locks, and take gun safety classes. That's a critical need in a country where more than 4.5 million children live in a home where a gun is kept loaded and unlocked. 72% of our gun injuries occur within the home, and it causes more than 500 deaths and 26,000 injuries nationally every year. The second element, investment in violence prevention, is a modest gun fee that will be paid by gun owners, will directly fund community-based organizations employing evidence-based gun harm reduction initiatives, including, as I mentioned, domestic violence and suicide prevention programs, addiction and mental health treatment, gun safety classes, and other initiatives that are established through the evidence. Overwhelmingly, gun owners and their families will be the beneficiaries from these programs because the services will be focused on reducing the risk of harm precisely where the harm is the greatest, within homes where a gun is owned and possessed. The harm of gun violence in our community takes many forms, of course, most palpably in the devastating pain experienced by hundreds of our families every year. But what we were seeing from a report that we released publicly just last week from the Pacific Institute on Research and Evaluation shows that there's a financial cost as well. San Jose taxpayers subsidize gun ownership $151 annually per firearm owning household. Let me repeat that. San Jose taxpayers subsidize gun ownership to the tune of $151 for every household that owns a gun in this city, or nearly $40 million per year. And that's the cost to pay for public services, particularly emergency response services for gun violence. When private financial costs to individuals and families are included, San Jose residents incur an annual burden of $442 million per year. Certainly, the Second Amendment protects every citizen's right to own a gun. It does not require taxpayers to subsidize that right. The fee we propose will be modest, $25 annually plus small additional costs for program administration. And the funds generated from this fee will go directly to nonprofit organizations that are created, directly to a nonprofit organization being created by a team of public health and gun violence experts who will distribute the funds. And I'd like to thank the many community partners who have been working to establish this nonprofit organization led by, of course, Esther Perales-Diekman, but many others have stepped up, and I want to thank Raimundo Espinosa, the CEO of Gardner Health Services, Michelle Liu, the CEO of Health Trust, Stanford University Medical Center infectious disease specialist, Dr. Julie Parsonet, and many others who are lending their time, talent, energy, and expertise to this effort. And of course, I want to thank the many community leaders and advocates who comprise Moms Demand Action, who have been great partners of ours, inspiring our work here and in communities throughout the country. San Jose has an opportunity to become a model for the rest of the nation, to invest in proven strategies to reduce gun violence, domestic violence, and suicide, and the many other preventable harms from firearms in our communities. Most importantly, we can save our own community members from the painful horror of loss that too many of our families experience each year. It's my great honor to be able to introduce Esther, and thank you, Esther, for hosting us here in front of Next Door Solutions for Domestic Violence.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. My name is Esther Perales-Diekman. I'm the Executive Director of Next Door Solutions to Domestic Violence. We are the largest and oldest provider of domestic violence services in Santa Clara County. It's my pleasure to be here today. I want to start out by sharing that the research shows that in the United States, we have 90 guns for every 100 citizens. We are the most heavily armed society in the world. Every year, annually, in the U.S., 45,000 people die from firearms. And of those people, nearly 20,000 are due to firearm homicides. The tragedy of the killings at the VTA facility last year brought the issue of gun violence to the forefront in a very painful and public way. We in the field of domestic violence deal with the harm, the homicides, and the injury related to gun violence. Often the deaths, injuries, and damage make us feel helpless, and we wonder what can really be done. When guns are used in a domestic violence situation, it can exacerbate harm and even be fatal for not just the victims, but perpetrators, law enforcement, and other third parties. even co-workers. Annually in the U.S., 1 million women report being shot, and 4.5 million women report being threatened with a gun by an intimate partner. It is estimated that the risk of death is 5 times greater when a gun is present. Between 2010 and 2019 in the U.S., 56% of women who were murdered by an intimate partner were killed by a firearm. It's time to shift the burden of all of that damage and injury to the people who carry guns, and we ask them to stand up as responsible gun owners to ensure that we work together to create a safer community environment for all our families. Tomorrow, the City Council will be taking an unprecedented step to curb the effects of gun violence with an ordinance that will require owners to carry liability insurance and to pay a small fee, and that funding will be used to offset the damage. There are many organizations working in our community with very limited resources to help the families who are dealing with the aftermath of gun violence. We encourage San Jose residents to join us in support of the ordinance, which would be the first in the U.S., and we encourage them to call their city council members to pass this important ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther, and thank you for the incredibly important work that you and your team engage in every single day. It's now my great honor to introduce Sharon Jenkin, volunteer California State Lead for Community Outreach for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Sharon and many other members of Moms Demand Action have been deeply involved in this effort and many other efforts here in the city of San Jose for sensible gun regulation, and I'm grateful for her leadership. Sharon?
Thank you, Mayor Liccardo. I am a volunteer leader with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and also a volunteer with the Silicon Valley Alliance for Gun Safety, and I am a survivor of gun violence. My beautiful and brilliant sister, Judy, my best friend, lost her long-term partner to cancer. Consumed with grief, she impulsively reached under the mattress where her gun was not securely stored and shot herself to death. I miss her every day. Most people who attempt suicide do not die unless they use a gun. Across all suicide attempts without a gun, 4% result in death. But when a gun is involved, that figure skyrockets to nearly 90%. Nearly 2/3 of deaths for young Americans in the U.S. are suicides. As a mother, this breaks my heart. Sadly, gun violence in all forms is on the rise. Every 12 minutes, a life is stolen by gun violence in America. That's more than 110 deaths a day. Guns are now the leading cause of death for young Americans ages 1 to 17. We should not have to live and die this way. This ordinance is an innovative approach to address the costs of gun violence and incentivize safer gun practices that can potentially prevent firearm deaths and injuries. We all want a safer San Jose, a safer California, and a safer nation. With this approach, we can move closer to that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Sharon, thank you again for your advocacy and your leadership. It's my honor now to introduce a colleague of mine who is also a survivor of gun violence, and that is Vice Mayor Chappie Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. I have advocated for policies to reduce the harm of guns for both gun owners and non-gun owners throughout my tenure on the City Council. In a city where annually more than 200 people die from firearm-related injuries, it is clear that we must use every tool available to us. The shooting at VTA last year was a tragic reminder of the harm that firearms cause to our society. and it reinforced the need for common sense solutions to reduce gun-related tragedies. The cost of firearm injuries in San Jose to both society and our government runs into the millions of dollars. Between lost work, quality of life, taxes used for emergency response, hospital, mental health services, criminal justice services, to name just a few, it is our belief that these costs should be the responsibility of gun owners. Our proposal will make San Jose a safer city to live in, while simultaneously reducing the financial hardship on both government and our taxpayers. Finally, the impact of gun violence affects tens of thousands of people every year. Our residents are looking to our elected officials and leaders for more than just thoughts and prayers. They are looking to us to create solutions that will keep them and their community safe from gun violence and harm. I am so proud of my courageous council colleagues who are moving this proposal forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor Jones, and I appreciate your courage and that of our next speaker, Council Member David Cohen, who has been on the council for just barely more than a year, but is already leading on so many critically important initiatives. Councilmember.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm proud to stand alongside Mayor Liccardo, community members, and my fellow council members to support these important measures. Gun violence is a public health crisis in our country. The purpose of our proposal is to reinforce responsible gun ownership and prevent the misuse of guns that affect too many of our fellow San Joseans. When people think about gun violence, they often assume we are focused on tragic mass shootings like last year's incident at VTA, or they assume that we are talking about criminals acting out in the community in criminal acts. But far more prevalent are suicides, domestic violence shootings, and accidental shootings. These actions are a byproduct of the ready availability of guns and are often not the intended use of the weapons that law-abiding residents purchase. We know the facts. Communities with higher gun ownership experience more gun violence, and places with reasonable requirements for gun ownership have fewer gun-related injuries and deaths. If we save just one life, it will be worth it. And for those who still end up as victims, creating a mechanism to help pay for their losses and pay for the societal cost can make a huge difference. According to research conducted by Everytown, gun violence is responsible for 40,000 deaths and twice as many injuries in an average year across the country. The economic impact of gun violence in the United States is $34.8 million a day, roughly $280 billion a year in associated costs. To put that staggering amount into perspective, the entire annual budget of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is about that same amount. We also heard from the mayor the financial impact on San Jose from gun violence here within our borders. By encouraging people to be more responsible with their weapons, we can save lives. We can do more, and I'm excited that San Jose has an opportunity to take the lead and make our community safer. I want to thank all the advocacy groups and experts who have helped us understand the data and helped us craft the policies Council will be voting on tomorrow. I want to thank Sharon and Moms Demand Action for all the advocacy over the years that has kept this issue in the forefront. And I want to thank Esther, Next Door Solutions. You've have been and will continue to be valuable partners when it comes to addressing domestic violence in our community and the effects of gun violence on our residents. I truly appreciate your help in implementing the new policy. It's long past time we take action. We can no longer wait for others to solve this problem for us. San Jose can be a model for others to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member. I also want to thank two other colleagues who have been co-authors of this effort since we launched it, Council Member Raul Perales and Council Member Magdalena Carrasco, neither of whom were able to be here today, but of course will be there tomorrow to cast the critical vote. Finally, I'd like to thank Cristina Gumera and Paul Pereira, who have been spearheading this initiative on my team. Really grateful for their very hard work and their efforts. So we're happy to take any questions here collectively or afterward in person, and we're also happy to respond in Spanish. Marianne? Hi.
Mayor, can you tell me how a lot of people obtain guns illegally? So will this have any impact on those people?
Well, we have existing laws in place for folks who obtain guns illegally, and the challenge, of course, obviously, is being able to identify them and make arrests and seize guns. What we also know is there are roughly 300 million guns in this country that are owned legally. Both are big sources of harm. I think Councilmember Cohen made the point well. Certainly we should be concerned about criminals who are running around illegally with guns, and for that we have many federal and state laws, and they should be fully enforced. We also have hundreds of millions of guns that are owned legally, and they are also a source of enormous amount of death and harm in our community, and we need to be addressing that as well.
Mayor, when looking at the data, it seems that the biggest source of the biggest spend that the city has is from homicides and assaults on gun violence. Do you anticipate that the $25 annual fee will reduce that, or what will it go to?
Yes, so where it will go to will be determined by the board of this nonprofit that is being formed. Esther is spearheading now. And the good news is we've got a lot of folks with expertise in this area, and they'll know where the studies point the dollars to go. That is where they can be best used to prevent gun harm. But I think, as Esther described so well, if we know, for example, that a domestic violence survivor is 5 times less likely to be a survivor if there is a gun in the home, then certainly investment, for example, in domestic violence prevention programs is going to be a key place where we should start. We also know that roughly a third of deaths every year from firearms are by suicide. And there's much we can do in terms of mental health treatment and suicide prevention that can certainly reduce that, we hope. And critically importantly, we know that those same individuals who may be suicidal are often the very ones who are inflicting harm on others. We've seen that too many times in mass shootings. And so getting to those who need mental health services but have a gun in the home, that could be the most valuable thing we do.
So it won't necessarily reduce the city's response, right? The cost of the police.
No, there has been a modification in our approach, and we believe a direct investment in violence reduction and harm reduction is the best way these dollars can be spent. Certainly we always need more dollars for police and emergency medical response, but that's the city's responsibility. We're going to continue to fulfill that responsibility. These fees will be used directly on reducing violence.
Do you have any idea how much is that insurance, and are there exemptions in this law?
Yeah. So the insurance is widely available on the market. We've contacted, I know Christina has had contact, I think, with more than 15 insurance companies that routinely provide homeowners insurance and renters insurance. And if you look at your own homeowner's policy, you'll see that almost invariably it actually contains provisions for liability protection if there's a gun in the home. Now, if you identify that there's a gun in the home to your insurance company, they may be doing things with their premiums to encourage you to get a gun safe or a trigger safe, a trigger lock on your device. And that's exactly what we want to see happen. We want insurance companies to encourage and incentivize safer ownership.
Are there, with police and multi-unit buildings, are there some people who don't have to pay the fee?
Yes, there are exemptions for law enforcement, and there are exemptions for those because of state laws that are very complex. I won't bore you with. We have to provide exemptions for those concealed carry permits. That's a very small number of people in this county.
Mayor, how many guns do you think are in the city? And if every one of them paid the $25 fee, how much ballpark are we looking at?
Yeah, we've had an analyst look at this from the Pacific Institute Research and Evaluation. Dr. Ted Miller, his estimate is between 50 and 55,000 households currently have a gun in them. The fee will be paid essentially by the household.
And that's one gun per household?
No, they're on average. There are multiple guns, and there's some difference, I know, among the experts about how many guns on average are owned by each individual, but it may be as many as 7 guns. I'm looking at Christina now to confirm, yes.
And the fee will be paid for per gun?
It'll be paid per household. So it'll be paid per owner, I should say, not per gun. So it'll be per owner.
55,000 times 25, so that's 1.4 million?
Yes.
Sound about right?
Yep. And we're going to have a small little administrative fee, so that way Esther's, whatever nonprofit that Esther and her team creates, can pay the basic bills of whatever it takes to manage these resources. Yep.
So this applies to just gun owners in the city. If somebody buys a gun here at a gun store, there won't be a fee at the time of purchase?
No, this is an annual fee that's paid by residents living here in the city of San Jose. We have, of course, other regulations to address purchase.
Can you elaborate on how it's going to be enforced, how people will be required to get that insurance in at time?
Yes, so we'll be communicating, and we've been working with the Department of Justice. They actually have a pretty good database of all the gun purchases that have been made over the last several decades. So we'll be communicating with gun owners about their obligation through a letter, and obviously in other public channels. There will not be any proactive enforcement, but rather reactive enforcement. And this gets to another point I'll get to in just a moment, which is the way that we'll know someone either has insurance or not, or has paid their fee or not, is a police officer who encounters somebody with a gun or has reason to believe that they have a gun will ask the question, hey, do you have insurance for that? In the same way that any driver who's pulled over will be asked for insurance. And they will either be able to produce the document or not. And the requirement is that the document is kept with the gun. Now, this is particularly important for us now as we think about reactive enforcement, because right now we have a United States Supreme Court that is, in the view of many legal scholars, about to invalidate a concealed carry requirement in the state of New York that will likely invalidate the same requirement here in the state of California. What all that means is that there is a great likelihood we're going to see a lot more people out on the street, in clubs, in bars, and other locations with guns, if in fact the Supreme Court invalidates those concealed carry restrictions. If that happens, that means there will be more encounters of officers with those who have guns, and this is an opportunity to ensure that the folks that they're encountering are in fact law-abiding.
Sam,
Yeah.
your opponents have promised a long legal battle, and it looks like one of the strategies they're going to use is to cite California's preemption laws that try to prevent this patchwork of laws in cities and counties all across the state. Your thoughts about this surviving a court challenge?
Yeah, no good deed goes unlitigated when it comes to gun regulation, so we expect there'll be lawsuits. That shouldn't deter us. The good news is we've got a great law firm, Kitchett and Petrie, that is committed pro bono to take this case on, and we've got a lot of national organizations like Everytown and Brady United that have also offered to lend their legal expertise. So we're going to have a great team, and we're going to make sure that our taxpayers are protected. Now, with regard to the legal realities, first, I think with regard to the Second Amendment, as I said, the Second Amendment protects every citizen's right to own and possess a gun. It does not mandate that taxpayers subsidize that right. And we believe we have a very strong case that there are a whole host of constitutional rights that we all have for which we routinely pay fees, whether we're trying to organize a 501c4 political advocacy organization or whether we're trying to file a lawsuit in civil court. We still pay fees. So this is nothing new. With regard to the state issues, we've been in communication with the State Attorney General's office, very active communication with them, as well as a couple of legislators. They are very interested in working with us collaboratively, and I really want to thank Attorney General Rob Bonta. I want to thank Assemblymember Phil Ting. I want to thank Senator Josh Becker and others who are stepping up, both because we believe there is a legal path and because there may well be additional state legislation that can help create a clearer path for other communities who want to follow San Jose's lead. And I do often hear from other mayors who are asking me, hey, how can we make this happen? So we appreciate that perhaps with some help in Sacramento, this can be more available to more cities. I know that legislation has been drafted at this point, but we're a long way off from that point. We need to get this over the goal line here in San Jose.
You have the two behind you. You mentioned two more names. Do you have the votes? Do you think you have the votes?
I'm never going to predict whether or not we have the votes, but the good news is we had a strong support in June. It was unanimous then. I expect it'll be a bit more contentious now. We'll find out.
Gina, last question. Two questions. When do you anticipate the nonprofit will be ready to go? And what are the next steps if this happens? When will the fee be implemented? When will the insurance be required to
Okay, let me answer a few of them, and I'll certainly want to encourage Esther if she'd like to add. First, we've got lawyers working, there are lawyers who are working on the incorporation and so forth for the nonprofit, and key leaders are meeting about that formation. They'll have some time. It's going to be 6 months before this becomes operative, and we're not going to actually collect fees under the proposal that my colleagues and I have authored. We're not going to start collecting fees until we can get the facial challenges to this ordinance resolved, and we expect at least the facial challenges may take a few months. I'm sorry, the facial legal challenges, that is in litigation. Yeah, Esther, did you want to offer?
I think we want to be very clear that this proposal is a multi-pronged approach. By engaging responsible gun owners in these very simple, straightforward initiatives, that will help offset the impact of gun violence. Groups like Sharon's, groups like Next Door Solutions, we're in the business every day of working in the aftermath of violence. When people have lost a loved one, when that loved one was the breadwinner of a home or was the child of a family, there is immeasurable impact that our agencies are involved with. It is extremely time-consuming and intensive work. It is traumatic work for both the victims and the people who are doing the work. So we think this is a very small step, but an important first step in the country. We're asking gun owners essentially to give up 5 commercial cups of coffee a year to pay for the fine. The liability insurance would never compensate a family who has lost a loved one due to gun violence. So we want to make real clear that in our opinion, this is a no-brainer for San Jose if we're committed to the safety and well-being of families. Regardless of where you are in the city, what geographic area, your socioeconomic level, gun violence has affected every single community in this city. So we're excited and supportive of the proposal. Thank you.